Welcome to Empire Prints. Today we're going to be making a Phase 1 realistic Horn Company helmet. I haven't seen any online, so I thought, why not make it? It's one of the cooler battalions, in my opinion, with the markings on the top with the green and the neon. We're using Galactic Armory's file right here, as you can see. I printed it in two parts, one dome, one bottom, on a Bamboo Lab P1S. And printed out pretty good. Got some rough spots under the visor and up here, and then on the fin. And to start, we're just gonna take a plastic welder and we're gonna just weld along the inside seam to make sure these click in nice. So we'll do that now. That we have the helmet nice and welded along this inside seam. Should be all good. Shouldn't be going anywhere. It's a pretty permanent fix when you melt the plastics together. But just make sure when you are welding, if I can get my mask off, when you are welding, you want to make sure you're wearing proper PPE. This stuff is nasty and it smells horrible. You do not want to breathe in melted PLA. So just make sure you're wearing proper PPE. And then after we welded the inside seam, we know these two pieces are not going anywhere. We're gonna start with some sanding, and to sand, I use a mouse sander to get the majority of the sanding done, and then we'll go into our fillers and primers. But to start off with the mouse sander, I always start with a very rough pad. I go as low as 80 grit. It's up to you how low you wanna go. I recommend 80 because you'll get about 80% of the lines out. So it's, except these big ones up here, you'll just need some Bondo spot putty or some wood filler, whatever is your preferred method. As I was saying before my camera decided to fall over, whatever is your preferred method. Bondo is a little more toxic, but it is easier to work with in my opinion than wood filler. I tend to have problems because I wet sand. The only dry sand I do is with the mouse sander. After that, I only wet sand because I hate all the dust particles. But we're gonna hit this with the mouse sander and then we'll go from there. And when mouse sanding, just want to make sure to move the mouse sander around as much as possible. Try not to stay in one area because you will burn through the plastic and will cause more prep work. So just be mindful of that when sanding. The 80 grit sanding is done. I also went in with some 220 for this berm up here that I couldn't get in. It's pretty smooth, not smooth, but pretty rough way to get out the layer lines. It's a very aggressive approach, obviously. Still got these deeper layer lines that are gonna need some Bondo or some wood filler, and up here as well. But good start so far. And now after I do my 80 grit, just to smoothen out all this rough, it's very rough and dusty, I take a 220 grit pad and just kind of smooth it over. I'm not trying to get any layer lines out or anything I missed. That will be filled in later. My only goal is to just kind of make this smoother, so when I put primer and Bondo on it, it's something smoother to go over, and honestly saves you a lot of cleanup work. So we'll get to the 220 grit and we'll be right back. Now have sanded the whole helmet, which I call my initial rough sand. I always recommend doing this as it makes later steps in sanding way easier, that you got a majority of the layer lines out. From here on out, it's just about smoothing it and filling these big gaps in the print, which just come from the dome and then up here on the top, on this top brim. So, but it's pretty smooth. This 220 really gives it a much smoother finish, so it's very easy to work with and easy to sand from here. Now we move on to glazing and spot putty. I give all my helmets after this initial rough sand, instead of going straight to filler primer, I make a glaze out of just mixing some acetone and some glazing putty. I make mine a little more like a watery texture than a milky texture, as if you make it too thick, when you're brushing it on, you'll see brush strokes and it's a lot harder to smooth out. So just make sure to put good chunk of acetone, and just a little bit of Bondo. Make it like a watery texture is what I shoot for. And that gives it a nice, like a filler, because within 30 seconds to a minute, I can sand it. And then I do this one more time in between wet sanding both of the glaze layers. Then I filler primer. And by that point, all I gotta do is fill in this and up here, and it's pretty much done. You can, with this process, I've been able to finish a helmet in a day and get its base coat on and go from there. So let's get this glaze on. And now here I'm just laying down that first layer of Bondo and acetone, making sure it's a nice watery consistency. It's much easier to work with and lays a lot more flat. And you kind of want to just brush it over the whole helmet, make sure it gets in all the crevices. And then after this, we can go on to wet sanding, which I do next year. Here's what it looks like after the Bondo acetone layer has dried. I normally give it about 5 minutes, but if you really wanted to, within a minute, you can start sanding this stuff. It dries super quick. But this is why I use the thin layers, because these drips, which if you used a thicker layer, kind of bulge out from here and it leaves a groove. It's just more sanding. So I use very, very thin layers. So now we're gonna take some 400 grit sandpaper and we're going to just wet sand this entire Bondo down. Up here, it even started to get some of the lines filled in. But we're just gonna sand this down pretty rough with the 400 grit. You can be kind of aggressive, get it nice and smooth, and then we'll rinse and repeat and do one more layer of Bondo before we put on any sort of primer. Okay, this is after 2 layers of the Bondo, sand 400 grit. It's pretty smooth. Most of the lines are out, most of the tiny imperfections. Really just the fin up here that might need a little bit more Bondo after the filler primer, but it's ready to put some filler primer on, and then after that should really only need a wet sand and then maybe a little Bondo on any of the areas that might be a little more rough still. So let's go get the filler primer on. Here I'm putting on the filler primer. Accidentally recorded in the wrong format, so excuse the video. But after this, the helmet was good. I only had to put a little Bondo on the fin and it was ready for paint. As you can see, nice and smooth. Just make sure to do a dust coat and then move on to your heavier coats. White, you definitely need more than 1 coat, as it can be pretty transparent and you can tend to miss spots, so just be mindful of that when painting. And now here is the helmet all taped up with the dark green areas that I needed to paint. And all I used is some light green from Vallejo and some Vallejo cork brown. I kind of just eyeballed these colors until I got the desired color I wanted in my airbrush. I prefer a nice matte finish on my clone helmets. I think it brings a really clean look and it's very easy to weather, especially when you use airbrush paints. As you can see later from my weathering technique, it's very easy to scratch up. And then after laying down the paint, as you can see, you got a very clean finish. Didn't have too many issues with the airbrush, sprayed up pretty clean. I just made it a nice watery consistency. And this is where the problem I encountered was I got a little aggressive when ripping off the tape and actually peeled up some of the white paint, which initially frustrated me, but I knew in weathering I would be able to hide it. And I got super clean lines, so otherwise not too much of an issue, but just make sure you're careful when pulling off that tape, because you will rip paint up. And then here I'm just using an X-Acto knife. I think it gives a really refined finish. You can get super detailed scratches, and turned out great. I was super happy with how it looked. Once I was done weathering those green stripes, I went on to painting the top of the dome in this neon green color, just using some Vallejo deep yellow and some Vallejo light green again. Just kind of eyeballing the color until I got the tone I wanted out of my airbrush, and then moved on to hand painting all the details, such as the brow line and the back detail portion of this helmet, as well as the section in between the doe of the brown line with some gray. I find this to be a little faster and more efficient when it comes to painting my props. It's pretty simple process. You just got to be careful to water down your paints so you don't get brush strokes.
Now moving on to the weathering process, I like to mix some black and brown acrylic paints and kind of make it into this motor oil color. And I just want to wipe that all over the helmet while wiping off the excess with a wet or dry paper towel. This helps dim down the white and give it a little bit of a dirt grime texture throughout the whole helmet. After my initial weather wash, I go into my favorite part of the weathering process, which is dry brushing. Here I just mixed up some orange and some brown and just dry brushed it in the crevices to make this rust color around the ears and this back circle. All I do is dab it in there and then wipe off the majority of it with a paper towel, leaving just a little bit of the excess in the hard to reach crevices. Here I'm doing the same thing with that rust color, except I'm dabbing it into the vents on either side of the helmet, just giving it a little bit of weather wash to help blend it in to the rest of the helmet. And then I go into this black wash, which I put in all the crevices. It's more of a dry brush than a wash, just to provide a more realistic buildup of dirt in all the lower areas. After that wash in the crevices, I go on to a complete dry brush where I just get a little bit of paint on the ends of my brush and kind of just put it over any edges or high spots where I think might have picked up any scratches or even scorch marks. This is completely up to you and how far you're willing to go. I prefer a much more lived-in, weathered helmet. I think it really tells a story and provides a more realistic approach. I mean, these guys fought in the war for years. They've gone from planet to planet, ship to ship. They are not clean. And I think it's so cool what you can do with a helmet when you take your own style of weathering. Finally, I put in a Hobart face shield from Amazon and just did a pretty rough cut of the visor outline and added in some mesh. And this helmet was all ready to be shown off. If you made it this far in the video, thanks for watching. I had a lot of fun making this helmet. I've got plenty more coming your way. If you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate you subscribing. I'll be sharing more like this every week.